After the Nazi invasion of Norway in 1940, a Norwegian photographer was thrown into a hut by German Gestapo. He spent a long time in there, without food, without water. His crime? Well, he documented what had just happened to his country. He had photographed looted and burned farms, and his countrymen living under foreign rule. When the Gestapo finally let him out, they beat him. But this man wasn't finished taking pictures. He had only just begun. This episode of 200 Norwegians is about Campbell Norsgaard, the photographer who captured the war and later the hidden wonders of the natural world. This podcast leans on documented history. I get most of my material from books, newspaper articles, and sometimes old footage or photos. All those things exist because someone at some point decided to document the time they were living in. One of those people who captured both Norwegian and American history was a man named Campbell Norsgaard. His work was exhibited at St. Olav's College this summer. In that exhibition, you could see his photos from Little Norway, a World War II training camp in Canada. He also documented the Nazi occupation of Norway and the king's homecoming after the liberation. Norsgaard captured moments that wouldn't have been captured otherwise, and his life intersected with some really interesting people. But who was this person who just happened to be there with a photo camera at some of history's key moments? Ironically, there isn't much documented history about Campbell Norsgaard himself. So in this episode, I don't have a history book to lean on, but we do have the photos. And what we're going to do in this episode is what most historians usually do. They use a few sparse sources and they talk to someone. And the person we're going to talk to is Heather Turner. Turner grew up with Campbell Norsgaard as her grandfather. And Turner has graciously shared some private photos with us. So in this episode, we're going to go through those photos one by one. And we will begin with the first picture she shared with me, which is a photo of a mother and her son. I would say the child here is probably 2 years old and he's wearing a sailor style outfit. This is obviously Campbell and his mom. The
Yes.
most striking thing is that there isn't a dad
Father.
in the picture.
Right.
Why was that?
But he never talked about his dad at all, other than I think the one time he ever said anything, he just said he was very strict. But he also said he was barely ever home. And then I think, from what I recall, is at some point when he was fairly young, maybe before 10, his father kind of stepped out of the picture. So his mother primarily raised him alone. He did say life was very, very hard at that time period. I know this is kind of way, way, way back before all the modern amenities, but people joke around about we having to walk 10 miles to school in the snow. I think in his case, when he said things like that, he was actually being very realistic about it.
Hmm.
So he did talk about there were times that he was hungry growing up. A lot of the clothes that he had were handmade. He's actually the one that taught me to sew. I don't sew well, but I can repair socks very well. So,
I've also found a few newspaper clippings
mhm.
from the 30s
Yes,
that are suggesting two things. The first thing is that he was a very promising athlete.
yes.
He excelled as an speed skater in Norway,
Hmm.
won
Yep.
several competitions, but he also competed in
Mhm.
Oslo,
Yeah.
which would suggest that he relocated to Oslo at some point.
He he told me that he relocated to Oslo when he was, I think he was 19, 18 or 19. And he moved in with, I'm trying to remember, it's been a long time. He moved in with some distant relatives of his. But yeah, he used to do a lot of competitions, speed skating, and also a lot of not, I don't know if it was professional, but competitive skiing.
The next picture shows two men surrounded by tons of animal furs, and
Hmm.
the furs are just piled high on
Yep.
tables and chairs, and
Hmm.
both of the men are wearing white coats, um,
Hmm.
suggesting they might be furriers or traders
Yeah.
examining their stock. And
Hmm.
I believe Campbell Norsgaard or Campbell Norsgaard, as he is often being referred to in this era, is the man standing to the left. Do you think so
Yes.
as well?
Yes, and I have a bunch of pictures that were taken around that time period, and he always pronounced it in this country Norsgaard, which I know is not the Norwegian saying of it. My mother said that his pronunciation originally before he moved was Nushgor.
Hmm.
Okay. There is a lot of pictures, and he did used to talk about being in the fur industry. I know we have bills of lading and some travel documents from when he went on primarily ships back and forth. He went to Morocco too, apparently around that time period. And he just said he met a lot of interesting people, as he liked to put it, and that working in the fur trade, it stunk a lot. Like literally it stunk. And he said that he would come home and his clothes would be so laden with musk from the skins that sometimes he had to just like leave them outside for weeks to fumigate them.
I also found some newspaper clippings that
Mhm.
says that he had a store in Akersgata,
Mhm.
which is
Yeah,
a very popular street in Oslo. And
right.
I would imagine that it wouldn't be easy to get a foot in the door there. So his business must have been a
Mhm.
pretty decent business,
I
which,
think I
yeah.
think it was. I think it was. He was a very savvy person, and I think by his own admission in his early years, he was very competitive. The skating, but also in business. I know that he did a lot of investing and bought gold and other. I don't remember exactly what he said, bonds, but I don't know whether they were U.S. bonds or other type of bonds. Um, and then later in life had a loss from that, and we can talk about that later as we go through things. And he kind of changed his mentality a little bit,
Hmm.
so became a lot less competitive, and definitely different mindset, I think, as he got older.
So the region where he grew up, Hadeland, was a
Mhm.
pretty rural area where there
Yeah.
were a lot of fur farms.
Mhm.
Think that he somehow took advantage of that or was able to establish himself as a fur trader because he knew fur farmers in Hadeland?
I suspect so. I know that a lot of the pictures of him were, sorting through fur. For example, there's one picture somewhere that I have. It's not in very good condition of him in I hate to say the slaughterhouse, which I know that, nowadays the fur trade is not looked well upon, but back in those days, that was big industry. I suspect that he probably had a mentor, but I don't know. He never talked a lot about it other than kind of superficially.
We should also mention that this is kind of the era of Sonja Henie, the
Hmm.
Greek figure skater that
Yeah.
was famous
Yes.
for always wearing these fancy furs,
Verse.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So they must have been very popular in the 30s, especially in Norway, I
Yeah.
suspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My grandmother Grace, we have a lot of pictures of her wearing like fur stoles and fur coats too.
Yeah, a story in Norske Tidene
Hmm.
from I believe from the 60s
Yeah.
suggests that he also traveled to the US in the
Yes.
30s. Did
He
he
did.
ever tell you about that travel?
We have two documents where he came by ship twice. Yeah, so he came over to Seattle and then New York both
Mm.
times during that time period, it looks like. And I'm assuming he came over because of the fur trade at that point.
Because many of his customers were in the
Mhm.
States as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Then everything changes in the early 1940s. And
Mhm.
the next picture I've found, or you actually found it for me, um, originates from the archives of the Norwegian American Historical Association.
Mhm.
And it shows a farm outside Oslo that
Yep.
had been looted and burned during the German
Mhm.
invasion of
Right.
Norway.
Right.
And a certain Campbell Norsgaard is credited as the photographer.
Mhm.
So how did this come about? How did like a fur trader, an up and coming fur trader, all of a sudden become a photographer?
He had always had an interest in photography. You know, we had tons and tons of cameras. My grandmother, Ernestine, had donated most of them to a museum in Norway after he passed, including some little spy cameras too, which I thought were very interesting. It always makes you wonder if there's a backstory with that. I know that he was a very, very moral person, and he felt that what was going on in Germany was very bad. So I think that was part of his, because he was such a, I think, moral, tried to be a good person in general. I think that just affected him very deeply. So I think that was part of the motivation for that.
Hmm. So, because he pretty much went back to Norway
Mhm.
to document what was
Yes.
going on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that got him into some troubles as
Mhm.
well.
It did. It did.
Yeah. Did he ever tell you about that?
The one story he told. So my grandfather had some stories that he would only tell once, and then he had some stories that he would tell multiple times. This was one of the stories I literally lost track of how many times he talked about this. And he did say that he was detained several times, and then one time he was actually thrown in the middle of the winter. I don't know if this is true or not, but it never changed in the repetition, so probably it was the same. He was basically thrown into a hut without food or water for a very long time, days and days at a time. And then when they pulled him out, they beat him. So,
Mhm. That was
I think,
because he was taking photos
yeah,
of
yeah,
looted farms and
mm, yeah.
German wrongdoings in
Mm.
Norway specifically.
Oh, yeah. He had a couple of stories about taking pictures and the opposing party would basically get in his face and start yelling at him and screaming at him and shoving him. So they were definitely, not wanting pictures of things taken and put out there publicly. Absolutely.
Hmm. And in the end, he realized that he just had to leave Norway.
Hmm.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
did he ever tell you about that?
Not so much leaving Norway. He said he was sad to leave, but he said that he thought America would be better for his kind of mental state at the time.
Hmm.
He didn't quite put it back, didn't quite put it quite like that, but he just said that he felt he would be happier leaving, even though that it was his home country.
Hmm.
So,
But as we will see in the next picture, he didn't
mhm,
go straight to the States,
yes.
because the next picture we're gonna take a look
Mhm,
at is of a woman that a lot of Norwegians would
mhm,
recognize. Probably not that many Americans, but
mhm,
the woman in the picture is the Nobel Prize winner Sigrid Undset, a
mhm,
famous author. And when Germany, just to give some context here, when Germany
mhm,
invaded Norway in April 1940,
mhm.
Undset was forced to flee. She had been a
Yep.
vocal critic of Adolf Hitler since the early 30s,
Mhm,
and her books had also been banned in Nazi Germany.
Hmm.
and she was on the Gestapo list, so she
Hmm.
escaped to neutral Sweden. And in this picture, she is
Hmm.
standing on a balcony, and she's dressed in a long robe, holding a fan, and she's gazing into the distance. But the most interesting thing for us is actually that the photo was taken by a certain Campbell Norsgaard once again.
Hmm. Yes.
Um, yeah, he traveled around with the famous Sigrid Undset and he took
Yeah.
photos. How did this come about?
So I don't know how he ended up on the Trans-Siberian Railway. I do know that he had gone to Japan at least once prior on a ship and that he was bound for Japan. And I think being on that train with her was just happenstance. He did used to talk about her, but also about her son. And he had struck up a friendship with the son. Apparently, we have several pictures of my grandfather and her son. I don't remember his name. I think it was might have been shared with an F. Um, and I think just it was similar age group. And I know that, after the trip years later, even well into, right before she passed, they did exchange letters. We have Christmas cards from her, for example, or not Christmas cards, but holiday cards from her. And we do have a couple of letters that we had, but apparently that they wrote, well, I would say fairly frequently, but maybe at least once a year or twice a year, just to stay in touch.
Hmm. Because they weren't only on the Trans-Siberian train
Mhm. Yeah,
together,
they were in Japan together for a while.
and they also ended up going to the States together because
Yeah.
she ended up moving to the
Mhm.
States. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's really cool.
It is. It is.
Now I'm going to talk about what Campbell Norsgaard arguably is most famous for,
Mhm.
and that was for documenting Little Norway. And Little Norway was a Norwegian training camp in Canada
Mhm.
during World War II, where young
Mhm.
Norwegians were trained as pilots and navigators and what
Mhm.
have you for the Norwegian Army and the Navy Air Forces. And it kept Norway's Air Force alive in exile and laid the
Mhm.
foundation for the creation of the modern Royal Norwegian Air Force. And
Mhm.
in these pictures, we see a scrapbook where there are pictures of, young soldiers in flight suits, and
Mhm.
we see a broad view of a military camp with barracks and flagpoles, and we see photographs taken from inside an aircraft. And
Mhm.
yeah, did he ever tell you about how he got assigned?
Did not. I wish he did. I wish in hindsight there are so many things that I wish that I could have and should have asked him.
I did actually find
Mhm.
out how he got assigned.
Oh, you
Um,
did? Okay.
I did, yeah, because there is an article. Let me pull it up here. Um, yeah, let me read it. I will jump right into it here. Like from San Francisco, Norsgaard went to New York in the
Mhm.
summer of 1941 after the United States had entered the war. He went to Colorado to join the ski troops. However, he was a little too old for that service and went to Canada to try his luck with the Norwegian Air Force. En route to Canada, he purchased Bell and Howell movie camera. Shortly after arriving in Canada, some of his cinematography was seen by Colonel Ole Reistad, who immediately made Norsgaard the outfit's official photographer and cinematographer. Did he ever t tell you about Ole Reistad?
He did not. This is brand new to me, but this is great though. It's always wonderful to learn some more history about that. He did talk about um being a photographer in the war, and about how he did all of the training the same as all of the other pilots that were there. He was just, I guess, as additional a photographer for everything. He basically said that it was very regimented, but the people there had a lot of fun too. We have a lot of photos and videos of, people having a good time and laughing and singing. And I know some of the videos that the historical society has of all of the recruits and the assignees together just seemed like they were having a decent time considering even what was going on in the world. But I think a lot of it was just trying to help build morale. You have the picture of the bear that I can speak to that story at least.
Can you describe what kind of picture you're
Yes.
looking
Okay.
at?
So that how that came about, according to my grandfather, was there was a mama bear that was getting in trouble in the camp, and somebody shot her, and then they found that there was a bear cub, and so they raised the bear cub from a bear cub to a bigger bear. There's actually, if you look again in the historical society videos, there's some pictures of it, but there's also one video of them trying to teach it to swim. So he used to say that they used to feed it dog food and old scraps from the kitchens. So, but he also said it used to follow people around like a little dog. They had a little chain that they had on it.
Oh,
So,
really?
mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know what happened to the bear after the
Bear on
fact.
leash, pretty much, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bear on a leash, but apparently it was like very, very, very tame. Like he remember him telling me a story about how he used to take his fist and like have the bear open its mouth and put his fist in there, and the bear would just kind of like sit there and look at him like, okay, what are you doing?
We also have a scrapbook page that
Mhm.
shows Princess Martha and her
Mhm.
kids visiting Little Norway, and
Yeah.
they're mingling with officers and posing for group shots. And
Hmm.
there are also several shots featuring King Harald of Norway,
Hmm.
who is
Yeah.
still, yeah, he was obviously a prince at the time. Uh,
Hmm.
and he's operating a movie camera and he's also taking boat rides on a
Hmm.
river. Did your grandfather ever tell you about his relationship with the royal family?
He said that he did a lot of following them around. I know that I can speak to the sailing part. He did a lot of sailing when he was younger. I think I had mentioned he had been friends with Tor Heyerdahl and that they had sailed together several times in smaller boats. And I know that he did say that he had taught some of the royal family to sail, but I don't remember him saying a particular one.
A newspaper article suggested
Mhm.
that he was the one that gave
Mhm.
King Harald his first sailing lesson.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And King Harald went on to become actually world champion in sailing, and he competed in 3 Olympics. So it was like an important seed that he planted there, I would argue.
Good, good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with it. It does sound important.
Do you think like your grandfather thought it was important to document these things? I mean, like he obviously had a career already, and he pivoted and became a
I think
photographer.
I don't know if well, it's hard to say. I mean, I think he just loved to take pictures when it boils down to everything, and he just I mean, when he passed, we had literally a whole room full of photos and videos. And the picture that I sent to you of just his film reels, that honestly is probably only a third of the amount of films, and those were finished films
Hmm.
that he did. Those weren't just all of the B clips that he clipped out and created his own. I remember when I was growing up, he would spend hours in his little film studio, going through and clipping film out into going reel to reel and then putting together bits and pieces from things too. So
There
he just
might be
what's
a
that?
lot of interesting photos that still haven't,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. He
discovered.
he just loves to take pictures. I mean, even up until right before he passed, he was outside taking pictures and video, you
Hmm.
know. So,
And then when the war ended, he got a
mhm,
really interesting assignment because he ended up going back to Norway
mhm,
and film the king's homecoming. And this was
mhm,
obviously a very important moment in Norway because the king
yeah,
had been in exile
mhm,
for 5 years, and he did so in colors.
yeah.
which was also a big thing.
Mhm.
Did he ever tell you about that?
Just that he thought it was interesting. Again, I think when he framed how he did photography, it was less about, I hate to say it's less about famous people and just about, he used to talk about framing things, people that are, he was a very artistic person, and people look at it through the lens of the camera.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of the things he was seeing, it was through that lens of the camera itself. And it was less about the important part, but also about making it so other people could experience it, if that makes sense.
Hmm. But the next picture shows a uniformed man standing
Mhm.
around several German fighter planes
Mhm.
marked with the Luftwaffe.
Yep.
And this was seems like this photo was taken in Norway after
Mhm.
the liberation.
Yeah.
And Campbell Norsgaard himself is in the picture.
Mhm.
But now he has a uniform.
Yes.
Seems like he was a second lieutenant
Mhm.
at the time.
Yep.
And he went, so I guess he went back to Norway again after the war. He obviously did because he
Mhm.
filmed The King's Homecoming. And
Yep.
did he ever tell you about his own homecoming and how it was to?
So he was married to my grandmother, my first grandmother, Grace, at the time, because there are pictures of him and her touring Norway. And this photo, for example, he apparently he liked to be in his own pictures, but what he would do is he would set the shot up and focus it, like he would have somebody stand where he's going to stand, and then he would go back behind the picture, or he'd have someone take the picture, but he would be in the picture. So he would set it all up first. And he did say that when they went back to Norway, they made a point of visiting all of the kind of the historical places that events had happened in Norway. And a lot of it was because he wanted to tell Grace about Norway itself and give her some history of it and why it was important to Norway and why it was important to him.
Hmm, hmm. And I also found a newspaper clipping,
Mhm.
and this clipping was from 1947,
Mhm.
and it tells that he showed a color film
Yep.
to a sold-out audience in Brooklyn, New York
Mhm.
in 1947. And
Yep.
this film was depicting um, a vivid journey through Norway's landscapes from the
Mhm.
south to the
Mhm.
north. And it
Yep.
was widely praised for its
Mhm.
beauty and photographic quality. And yeah, he screened this movie in one of the Norwegian community centers of the era,
Mhm.
I guess you
Yep.
can call it.
It would have been interesting to see that. I know that we have some color photos from that time, but I don't know. I think the footage that he had shot back there, unfortunately, probably got too degraded, at least the ones that we had.
And now we're gonna look at something that I believe you foreshadowed a little
Mhm.
bit already, but picture nine, what,
Yes.
what is that all about?
So this is Grace May Holman, who was my grandfather's first wife, and she was an ice skater. And she skated primarily at the Hotel New Yorker at the Terrace Room Ice Show. And so she performed with, the music of like Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey, and a bunch of the other famous bands of that time period. So we have lots and lots of pictures of her professionally skating, studio pictures. That's they in the picture, that's my mother, Melody May. And then, they were married for about 20 years, I think.
But you're obviously too biased to say this, but I will say it for you. But I think
Mhm.
we can say that she's a ridiculously beautiful woman.
Yes. She was very gorgeous. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
they were definitely a very attractive couple. And I might be a little bit biased, but I think so. So
Yeah. I'm not biased, but it's striking.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah. And
So
she was a professional ice
ice
skater.
skater.
Yeah.
Yep.
For
Yep.
many years. Do you
For
know how?
many for many years, I know that she came down with MS though. And she passed when she was in her 40s, 47, if I remember correctly. So she had MS for about 10 years, I think, and she passed when my mom was about 20.
Hmm. And in this picture, we also
Mhm.
see that in one of the pictures, we also see that
Yes,
she's wearing a fur outfit.
yes,
Uh,
yep.
you think that's how they got to know each other through the fur trade, or?
So how my grandfather tells how he met Grace was he was at a business lunch with some friends and they went to the hotel and he saw her and it was love at first sight. This is way, way back. So who knows? I'm gonna say that sounds like a great story.
Did he ever tell you about how he was able to support himself and the family after the war?
So he did do a lot of photography. It's my understanding that he stayed in the fur trade for a while and then he got more interested in nature photography. I don't know how that transition happened though, but I do know at some point his pictures started having insects and birds and raccoons and all kinds of other things in them. So, I think that was probably about, I would say maybe about 10 years of mid 1950s.
Quite a transition, though, from
Yeah, it was a
butchering
quiet
animals to
transition.
taking photos. Yes.
Well, I think because Grace had been sick for so long, I know that my grandfather apparently had done quite well as in the fur trade, but I suspect dealing with MS probably was a bit of a drain on the finances. There were pictures of their house when my mother was much, much younger and before they married, and it was definitely more upscale. And back when Grace had been sick for a while, he became the kind of groundskeeper custodian for a big estate in New Jersey.
Hmm.
So definitely, I think finances unfortunately went a bit downhill at that point.
Hmm. But then we can move on to the next picture.
Mhm.
And yeah, I will let you tell me what we're looking at here.
Okay, so that picture, that is my mother, Melanie, in her mid-20s, and that picture was around the time of the National Geographic special that they had done. So my grandfather filmed it, and my mother was in it. It was called The Hidden World, and it was on CBS, and I think it was 1966, Tuesday, December 13th, from the historical photos that we have from that.
Hmm.
And
Because
somewhere, hopefully, we have a reel of that needs to be transitioned over to digital. I have not been able to. I've tried over the years to contact National Geographic to get a copy of it, but it's impossible to get hold of anybody there.
and how did he get interested in nature photography? Did he ever tell you about that?
No, no, I just remember growing up with him always having a camera in his hand, either around his neck or with the film camera. And I think I had told you this previously when I spent a lot of time when I was growing up at his house, at my grandparents' house, back and forth. We used to stay with them a lot. And, it was totally normal to open the refrigerator and find like ants in there and grasshoppers and things in containers because the cold slowed them down. Because think back to that time period, we didn't have the digital photography, so he was able to take good photos of the insects because the cold had slowed them down enough to actually photograph. We had stacks and stacks of those round carousels with slides where he was doing nature walks and my mom was actually assisting with him. They do birding, edible plants, insects, just about everything in general. back, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, there's a place in New York State called Mohonk Mountain House, which has been there for a long, long time. It's a big, big, big area. And twice a year, and I think they still do it sometimes, they used to do Nature Week. So spring and fall. And they would hire my grandfather and my mom to come in and run Nature Week and give nature talks and nature walks. So we have a whole lot of photographs from that time period. But it was always fascinating, just kind of, following them around and going on birding hikes with everybody had their binoculars, and he talked about, uh, that this is how you could identify which birds, and going out in the middle of the night and finding owl pellets where the owls would, digest the mice, and then you'd find this little ball of hair with the skeletons in it, and then he'd sit there and he'd dissect it and he'd show people what it would look like in the middle of his hand. So I think he was just fascinated both by photography and just by nature in general.
Mm.
And when he talked about both, his eyes kind of lit up. You could tell it was just a passion.
Mm. And he also wrote a book.
Yeah, he wrote 3 books actually.
Yeah.
So he wrote, he and my grandmother, my second grandmother, Ernestine, wrote Insect Communities, How to Raise Butterflies, and Nature's Great Balancing Act.
Have you read those books yourself?
I have all of them.
So you became a little bit of an environmentalist or
he he
naturalist, I guess you can call
he
it.
he was very much an environmentalist. After Grace passed away, how he met my second grandmother, Ernestine, she had been involved in a huge project in New York City because they had been spraying pesticides in Central Park, New York. And that's how the two of them met each other.
Hmm.
So, and she definitely had not so much had a passion for nature. She loved nature, but her passion was more of the environmental side. Um, when my grandfather lived in Englewood, he was very, very involved in environmentalism, and he helped kind of set the stage for a place that's become Flat Rock Brook Nature Center in Englewood. They apparently they were going to do like a lot of clear cutting and other damage to the environment, and he helped preserve a lot of acreage there and help the development at the nature center. They apparently have a Campbell Norsgaard award that they give out too, which is neat.
Do you in any way see like a through line from his early years as a war photographer to his nature photography later? Or
That's hard to say because I didn't know him then. I only knew the nature photographer. But it almost seems in a way like it's two different people. And this is purely supposition, but I think after Grace passed, he maybe did a mental reset.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because again, I had mentioned this earlier. He used to be very, very competitive and very motivated, and he was definitely motivated when he became a nature photographer. But he kind of, I think, turned that passion into teaching.
Hmm.
He was a very, very patient person, very, very good with kids. A lot of the nature walks and talks that he did were to schools,
Hmm.
and I remember him being very, very good with children.
Hmm. Yeah, because at some level, though, it almost sounds like he felt that he had to document what wouldn't be
Mhm.
documented
Yeah,
otherwise, both when he
yeah.
was a young photographer and
Hmm.
a somewhat older photographer.
That is very true.
Hmm.
Very true.
Yeah, we're gonna look at the next picture here. This is yeah, what are we looking at here? Yeah, I want you to describe it.
So this is me with my grandfather trying to teach me how to skate. And I shouldn't say that because um, I have pictures of myself at like 2 or 3 years old on skates with the double bladed skates on either side. And I think he was trying to teach me to skate faster. I remember when I was younger, I used to play ice hockey, but I was never into figure skating. I know that my mom was for a while when she was younger.
Mm.
But I mean, my grandparents were like my parents in a lot of ways, again, because we spent so much time with them. So, how do I describe him as a grandfather? He was a great person. I wish he tried to teach me a lot about photography when I was a teenager. And unfortunately, I wish that I had paid attention because when you're a teenager, you're in teenage mode. You don't think about like how valuable this would be. And I do remember I picked a lot of things up from him. But I wish that I had paid attention more when he was trying to teach me that.
Mm. The last photo we're gonna look at is yeah, what are we looking at here? Almost looks like some kind
Mhm.
of old Norwegian cabin,
Yep.
but
So right. So this picture he had in his house in Lakeville. He had a big pine tree that had gotten hit by lightning. And again, we have pictures, and I remember him taking a chainsaw to this, and he built the cabinet that's in the back, and that he always called that room his Norwegian room.
you also see like tons of film rolls, old film
Mhm.
rolls.
Yes.
And I guess like in a very concrete way, that was an important part of his legacy. But apart
Yeah.
from that, what do you think was his legacy as a person and as a photographer?
Well, I was thrilled that the Norwegian American Society decided to digitize all of those photos and videos. I know that after my grandfather died, when my grandmother donated all of that, at the time I was a little puzzled, but I was glad after the fact. The films in this particular picture again were all his finished works. The amount of films that he had taken was many multiple times this. And unfortunately, a lot of those films got ruined.
What do you think his greatest contribution was, from your point of view?
Well, I think on one hand, contributing to the Norwegian legacy, from my perspective, not being a part of that, I know that he touched a lot of people and made a lot of differences to a lot of people's lives, though.
My name is Frederick Kalstveit, and this podcast was made in conjunction with Vesterheim and with the support from Norway House Foundation in San Francisco. The music you hear in the background was made by Jan Skoglen.